Sunday. I believe it's
54th
54.
edition of America's Greatest Game. Yes, sir.
Kansas City back in the Super Bowl after beating the Vikings 50 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yep.
And the Minnesota Vikings, again, the title of the book was, Will the Vikings Ever Win the Super Bowl? With the premise being, well, they keep going. Let's just win one. The Vikings have yet to return to the Super Bowl. And imagine if the name of that book was, Will the Vikings Ever Make It Back to a Super Bowl? Which now, let's see, I was 7 when the book came out. I'm 50 now. Becomes an honest question of, will I see the Vikings in a Super Bowl before I meet my demise?
And imagine, well, think about all of the NFC Championship game appearances for this franchise since the last Super Bowl appearance. This is not like the Detroit Lions we're talking about here, and they haven't even sniffed. The Lions got to one NFC title game in 91. And they lost to Washington. They got blown out in Washington. But think about all of the NFC title game appearances. I don't know. You might be able to tell me, did they make another NFC title game in the late 70s?
I believe, did they lose to Dallas in the late 70s again?
Maybe a year or two after
I started following them in Tark's last year. In fact, my first ever game at Met Stadium was Tark's last game at Met Stadium, which I think was the Eagles in 78. My dad took me.
Okay.
And they obviously did not go they didn't go back to an NFC title game after I started following them in 78 until the 87 Darren Nelson game.
Okay.
But I think they might have gone back to one NFC title game right after they went to the Super Bowl, and they might have lost to Dallas. But anyway, I love the premise as we sit here now preparing for Sunday's game. I love the premise in 1976 or coming out of that season that we are just so sick and tired of this team continually going to Super Bowls, and they lose to Kansas City, and they lose to Miami, and they lose to Pittsburgh, and they lose to Oakland. Yeah. And so the next time you go, can you please win? And the fact we haven't seen them go back.
Yeah, just looked it up. The very next season after they lost to the Raiders in Super Bowl 11, they made the NFC title game again and lost to the Cowboys at Texas Stadium 23-6.
All right. So there
1977 season.
So we will lead today's Ventline show 651-646-8255. A few topics to get to. Not with who do you think is going to win on Sunday, because honestly, I don't know that you care. You'll probably watch the game. Everybody does. But we'll lead today's show a couple of days out before Super Bowl 54 is played in Miami with the very simple question. Not when will the Vikings win the Super Bowl? When do you think they'll go back? And are you like me? I will invoke my own mortality here. Are you beginning to become concerned if you are 50 or older that you might never see them go back to? Because when I was 7, I ducked into part of that game. Got to be honest, didn't really care that much and thought to myself, the Super Bowl, the Vikings, my parents tell me they're in this stupid thing every couple of years. 651-646-8255. Not when will the Vikings win a Super Bowl. When do you think, if ever, what's your confidence, if you're a Vikings fan, that this franchise will go back to a Super Bowl? Let's go to our friend Dave in South Carolina. Hi, Dave. How are you today?
Hey, Judd. You sound like me. I'm the first one that said that, if you remember. About 3 months ago, I said, I don't think I'm ever going to win a Super Bowl.
I probably ripped it off. I probably ripped it off of you, Dave.
Yeah. And you told me to lay off of that. My dad used to always say that, and unfortunately, lost him about 10 years ago, really young at 57.
Ooh, sorry to hear that. That's terrible.
Yeah, thank you. But no, I remember sitting in his lap, watching the Super Bowl against the Raiders, and my uncle was a Raiders fan. My dad was so angry. I'll never forget it. I never understood why. Because I was only 5 or 6. And then shortly after I learned the hard way. But, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm the eternal optimist and the glutton for punishment because I'm a Vikings fan. So, me. I surely hope so. But, the only 2 teams that haven't been from the NFC, Judd, I saw were the Lions and the Vikings. I saw a stat about that somewhere recently in a certain period of time. So
yeah, that's probably true. That makes sense, Dave.
So anytime you're in a group with the Lions, I don't know, but
how do you? But Dave, how do you? Here's what I don't get. is, the Lions are, for the most part, just a dumpster fire year after year, and every once in a while they pop up and they're either decent or okay or halfway good. But the remarkable thing about the Vikings franchise is the fact that they're not that team, that they are a team that's consistently good. They are a team that's competitive. The mind-boggling thing about the Vikings is how do you not go in 2009? How do you not go in 98? How do you never get back there when, if you look at the track record of this franchise, the success is pretty consistent. That's what I marvel at.
Yeah. And if you remember, I told you I spent many years in Ohio. I used to have this argument with Cleveland fans, even before, LeBron won a basketball title there. But just in general, they've had an ineptness for a long time, but, I'd rather, how about with us? How about getting to the precipice and then basically being shoved off of the mountaintop? I completely agree. There's nothing worse than that. And that's why I've told you before, people, when you watch these broadcasts, and I know I'm biased on this, but there's a lot of people out there, including my buddies who were raised during that time, that say, you know what, Dave, we just can't pull for that team. And there's so many closet fans and so many people that dislike them because at the end of the day, the scoreboard tells a story. That's what our society is about, right? So, I mean, like I told you a couple weeks ago, Judd, I think it's similar to the Broncos, right? If you remember how their franchise was.
Sure.
I think once you win one, and maybe 5 or 10 years go by, of course they won 2 in a row.
Right.
I think a lot of that sting will come off and go away. But to be honest with you, buddy, I used to think about the Wilfs and saying, okay, this is going to be the group that's going to do this.
Yes.
And now I'm starting to say to myself, are they really being honest with themselves?
That's a great question. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And I think we're at that point where we're really about to find out. But, Jed, I want to say this to you. I think a lot of Viking fans out there, this would be a good thing to talk about in the next few weeks.
Sure.
I'll leave you this point, and I know Manny's talked about it too, and I can hear it in his voice. I think as a fan base, we're pretty forgiving. At this point, I'm saying, hey, if you got to shake it up and you got to have a couple down years, let's do it, and let's come back with a better product, a better leadership and talent at quarterback, and a better offensive line. And let's go non-sexy. Let's fade out of the limelight because nobody cares about us if we're not in the limelight.
Right.
And let's work our way back into a more modern NFL approach. And it's hard for me to say that because I'm not a big fan of that quarterback approach. But I tell you, the more I watch college football this year, Judd, which my son watches it quite a bit, as a big Buckeyes fan, I found myself saying, Dave, you might need to evolve on this, including the analytics pieces. And don't get me started on that because I think the Twins rely on it way too much. But you know what I mean. Yeah, instincts and analytics and
thanks,
going
Dave.
to the key positions.
Thank you, Dave.
Got you, buddy.
Yeah, well, and the one thing I think that we can come back to continually, the one consistent that the Vikings have not had since Tark retired probably is that quarterback. Like, that's the one thing. The Broncos had Elway. Now, he went to Super Bowls, lost them, was at the end of his career and won them. But if you look at the Vikings and you try and dissect, okay, what's the one thing? There have been a lot of good players. There have been a lot of good coaches. There have been a lot of good teams. But what's the one consistent thing? You really haven't had. Dante probably came as close.
He's probably the closest
right?
one.
Franchise quarterback.
And that was like a 5-year run, basically.
That was a 5-year run, and then that team went down quickly because the infrastructure around him grew stale. 651-646-8255. Not will the Vikings win a Super Bowl. When will they get back? That is the question. Hi, David. Thanks for holding.
Hi. Yeah, I'm 58 years old, and I'd say it's about 50-50 for my lifetime.
It's frightening, but I'm 50, man, and I'm not going to disagree. It's just when are they going to put together that team? I really feel like when you look at the times that they popped up, right? 98, that was a Super Bowl winning type of team. That was a great team. 2009, Favre was the final piece to a puzzle that looked like an incredible piece. So it's hard to make the assumption. unless they find that quarterback and put the components around him, it's hard to make the assumption that they're going to get back for sure. It is difficult. That's a crappy thing to say, but I think it's a realistic thing to say too.
The thing I was thinking yesterday is, what is the wow factor for the Vikings? You come away watching San Francisco and you go, wow, they got a great defensive line. They got something that's just great. And watching all the Super Bowls that the Vikings lost, they seem to have lost them in the trenches. They just got pushed around.
And how did that happen? Because I didn't watch them at the time. David, how did that happen with a defense that was that good?
I think the AFC. Well, you got a lot of people in the Hall of Fame on those offensive lines that push the Vikings around.
Yeah, Pittsburgh had some great players, right?
Too.
Yep.
Thinking the other day too. When was the last Vikings Pro Bowler on the offensive line? And I know Matt Khalil was. He was okay, but he was. When's our last legit?
Hutchinson,
probably Hutch, yeah.
Hutch at left guard, and he was outstanding. He's a Pro Bowl he's a Hall of Fame talent, but probably we do forget that Brad Childress built up that offensive line. It was pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
McKinney was a flaky dude, but he was an unbelievable athlete at left tackle. Hutchinson, I think, is going to be in Canton David someday at left guard.
You had a nice transition from Burke to Sully.
Exactly right.
Sully was really good.
Anthony Herrera wasn't great, but he fit in there. And if you recall, Lodeholt was drafted in, I want to say 2009, and plugged right in
as a rookie.
And he was
really good.
And he was a massive man. I would say the last time that, as a whole, I looked at this line and said it's really good was 2009.
Yeah, I was thinking also that. Great quarterbacks get to the Super Bowl a lot more often, but there have been some mediocre quarterbacks that have won the Super Bowl.
Sure. With great defenses, though.
Yeah,
thanks for the call,
that's the thing.
David. Appreciate the call.
Defensive lines, offensive lines.
Yep. Good call. Yeah, that you've got to have, the problem there is you've got to have, and it's what the Vikings want to do but can't accomplish, a dominant defense. Then.
Like a historic defense.
Yeah, but those are so...
The Brad Johnsons and Trent Dilfers and Jeff Hostetler's that won Super Bowls were because they had their counterparts were defenses that had Hall of Fame. Like, look at that Buccaneers defense.
Oh, yeah.
That won with Brad Johnson. There's Hall of Famers up and down that defense.
The Tampa Bay and Baltimore examples are so unattainable. And the game, too, keep in mind, too, I know that those championships, those Super Bowl championships came in the 2000s for those teams. But what you have to remember is this game has evolved and changed in ways that make it, if you have a defense like that, even more difficult now because the league does emphasize offense so much.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get calls against you that those teams probably did not. I'm not saying that's going to cost you a Super Bowl title, but this league now is so geared towards the importance of offense and scoring that saying, okay, we're going to do this on defense and the offense has to be good but not great, that makes it difficult.
Very quickly, let's think about this too. When was the last time we saw a great defense? Like, not just like, oh, that team was the best defense in the NFL that year. Like, great, like all-time great
Baltimore,
defense.
right? That beat the Giants team?
Baltimore, Tampa Bay, probably. Maybe the Seattle defense in 2013 with all of those names, the Legion of Boom. But Judd, it's hard to put together a defense that everybody looks back on and says, yeah, that was an all-time great unit.
The only two that jump out to me when you ask that question in the 2000s are the Buccaneers and the Ravens.
Yep.
Those are the only two. And I would argue that copying that with the way rules are now,
it's hard.
Even more difficult. 651-646-8255. 651-646-8255. Not when will the Vikings win a Super Bowl. Much simpler than that. When do you think they'll go back? Alec, you're up next. Welcome to the Coffee Club. What's up, Alec?
Hey, good to be here. All right, so I do think the Vikings are going to win a Super Bowl. I think it's going to happen probably 10 to 15 years from now, I would say. But here's the thing,
Alec. That's not good news for a guy who's 50.
Hey, Judd, listen. You maybe you run once a week. Just do little things, and hey, you can extend this thing. It's okay. It's okay. You'll see it. But here's the thing, and here's what I was going to say. It's going to be even shorter than that if and only if they can, we can look at parallels, right? Even though it's different sports, let's look at the team just down the road to the east of us in St. Paul, right? What did they do, right? They built a decent, a good, not great core like the Vikings have, and they used the fact that they got in to the postseason as justification to run it back. How many times have they ran it back? And only this year in the 1920 season has that running it back finally caught up to them and said, no, it finally didn't work. And how many years did they prolong the suffering when they could have torn it down earlier? You haven't had you've been bogged down by bad contracts.
Right.
Haven't had a true score since Gabrick. So if the Vikings can look at
Alec, you're not giving me hope so far. You just invoked the Wild, which is not. Look, I was on board for a while, but I also question their Stanley Cup capabilities in my lifetime.
Well, that's a completely different story. But that's the nice thing about the NFL, right? And that's why, Vikings, and that's why the NFL teams reign supreme. It's because you can actually change a lot from year to year. Do
you think they're ever? So here's my question. Do you think they're ever going to find the quarterback who is the gateway to get them there, the great quarterback? Because I really think it's frightening when we can draw the parallel between teams' last appearance in Super Bowl after the 1976 season when Disco was huge and Fran Tarkington. And you've had some good quarterbacks since then, but I don't think you've had what you would consider that franchise great quarterback. Do you think they ever find it in let's say the next 15 years, that quarterback, and actually either draft him or find him somewhere?
I think they draft him, and I think it happens within 5 years not because the Vikings are going to finally go, aha, but the rest of the league is going to start doing this. This is the new thing. And eventually the Vikings are just going to have to. So, yes, I do think it'll happen. They'll find the quarterback in the next 5 years, and that's when we'll see some real changes. I'll hang up and listen. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir. 651-646-8255. That opens up a phone line. I'm glad he's optimistic. 15 years doesn't really give me a lot of confidence.